Before we get started with the webinar, some basic hygiene I would like to uh, reiterate. So first is, if anybody has any question with respect to ongoing session, please use Q&A section. So you will get a Q&A section. You can ask your question over there. And from our team, we will either answer it on the chat or we will take it up at the end of the session. And still at the end of the session, if your query is not resolved, you can just raise your hand, and accordingly we will allow you to talk if there is requirement for it at the end of the session. And apart from that, you can use section to interact with the team. And in case you are not able to hear or you are facing any issue, please feel free to ping us on the chat. We have our team members there to assist you as well. And use Q&A section whenever you have any question. We'll be happy to answer over there or at the end of the session. So yeah, welcome everybody to the session. And yeah, first of all, I would like to thank everybody for joining for the session. We'll start with a brief intro of what we are talking about today, and then Shubho will jump into more of how to like detect API security issues, hands-on and all. Apart from that, we figured out that this is a very detailed topic. So initially we covered very basic of API security. Today we'll be covering a bit detail of it, and we realize that we won't be able to finish it in this webinar. So we'll be doing another follow-up webinar. We'll share that detail later. So what all will be covered, I leave that on Shubho to explain while he's talking more about it. And as for today's webinar, we might extend a little bit. So I would apologize in advance that I think we'll try to wrap it up by 3:15, but it will be 15 minutes stretched. Yeah. So a brief on what we discussed on previous session. Shubho, do you want to take that up before we start so that all the attendees can have a brief idea on that? And then I'll jump on today's session and a brief intro about us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Harshit. So, uh, let me talk about APIs. So, API is basically application programming interface. It's a little bit different than web pages, which you see. So, APIs are related to how one application interact with another application, and there are many kind of APIs. So for example, there is web APIs, there are system APIs, there are platform specific APIs. This webinar we would be only concentrating on web based APIs, and there are many kind of web based APIs which I will be going through in the webinar. But yeah, so over here it will only be comprising of web-based API by which when a server kind of communicates back with your browser or your front end, how those APIs interacts and how we can find out security loopholes on on those APIs or on those application programmable interfaces.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And what did we cover in initial session? If you can just brief them about, we'll share the recording in the email anyways with all the attendees as well.
Sure. So we already had one session of API security that happened around 2 months back. So that was a very basic touch point on what are the APIs and how API also falls under the OWASP top 10 web-based issues. So that's something briefly we had touched upon on the previous webinar, but this webinar will be much more focused on only API related issues and what are the different problems, what are different logical issues which is there, which we have to keep in mind. So yeah.
Great, awesome. So let me start with brief intro. So I hope all of you are already aware of who Shubho is. So Shubho is CISO and co-founder at Appknox. I am CEO and co-founder at Appknox. So I'll be walking you through briefly on the deck side, but Shubho will be giving you more hands-on experience of how to perform and what all will be covered in API security. So sharing a brief agenda. So we'll talk about why API security is important in 2020. Then OWASP API security top 10. We'll be giving you a demo of API security and also a brief on what would be covered in the subsequent session. So let me move to the next slide. So why API security is important? So we all know that the usage of API has increased drastically in last 3 to 4 years. The major reason for that is a lot of apps are interacting with each other. Apart from that, earlier also we used to have internal use APIs and all, and but they were again very restrictive. So in last 10 to 14 years, we have seen a rise, and as you can see, web APIs have grown exponentially, as you can see in the graph. And that is one of the major reason why attackers are also trying to attack through API vulnerability. And because it has grown so drastically, so a lot of enterprises don't have clear idea on what APIs they have, what are the possible vulnerabilities around it, or what are authorization and authentication done on those APIs. And that leads to a lot of complexity plus unknown variable for enterprises, and that's where we think API security is going to be in big demand in coming future. And we have seen a lot of cases where the hacks have happened around API security. So to give you an example, in 2018 itself, we had seen that Facebook developer API was breached and 50 million users data was hacked. Apart from that, we see that there have been frauds in banks, in different retailers, payment processors, and all. So we again stress on API security that it needs a dedicated assessment to be done on that side, and we'll be walking you through on what all can be done to cover API security of assessments. So without wasting much of time, I will leave it on Shubho to give a brief idea on what all we'll be covering. So over to you, Shubho.
Well, thank you so much, Harshit. Uh, for to perform API security assessment, you basically need a proxy. You basically need to figure out what are the APIs an application is calling. So there are few, proxies which we are using. So before I go ahead, let me share my screen, and yeah, let's do that. Let me know if my screen is visible. Okay. You guys can just put in a thumbs up. Mhm. All right. So so these are some of the tech stack which we will be using to perform API related issues, to figure out what are the APIs which is there, and uh, and one of the most important arsenal which needs to be used while performing API based security research would be all of these kind of proxies. Now today we will be talking, and I'll be showing mostly burp, because I think most of you have experienced using burp, and that kind of solves most of your issues. You do not need to learn any other proxy, but other proxies such as Fiddler, OAS, Zap proxy, and the Chance proxy, these are also very useful, and I'll come to those why it is so much useful, right? So I'll go to the next slide. And as I was talking about, that API security is very important, because this is how one application talks to another application. It doesn't have a visual identity, so it's all programmatic identity. So whenever one system talks to another system, they talk over the API, and the integrity of this message is being sent from the server to the client, or from one server to another server using APIs are very important, and that's what we have to figure out, and that's what we have to perform an assessment on top of that, right? So in the initial part of the talk, I was talking about There are a few kinds of APIs which is there, which are web APIs, system APIs, platform APIs. But this discussion is mostly related to web APIs. And in web APIs, we have different kinds of APIs which is out there. We have REST-based API. We have SOAP-based API. SOAP is a kind of a protocol, SOAP-based APIs. We also have GraphQL-based APIs. We have WebSockets. We have MQTT, and there are different kinds of protocols and APIs which are available nowadays. Now, this talk is specifically going to concentrate on all kinds of APIs which has a unidirectional flow. What do I mean by unidirectional flow? It means that when I send a request, I receive a response, but it is not kind of a bidirectional flow where I can open up a channel and I'll keep receiving responses from the server, or it's not going to be a streamable API. So those example of those kind of APIs are like MQTT based APIs or WebSocket based APIs or gRPC based APIs, which are like works on top of binary protocol or works on top of HTTP protocol itself. But then the data is exchanged in a bidirectional format, which means the server can send the data at any point of time if they feel like sending it or if the logic is like that. But the APIs which I'm going to talk about today is more like a request response based kind of an API, where you send a request to the server and the server is going to respond back with some resources saying, okay, you requested for this information and there you go. These are the information. So in the past, those kind of APIs were very predominant, which is the SOAP based API. And the problem is for those kind of APIs is authentication layer, and also APIs does not follow. Nowadays, there are APIs which follows cookie-based authentication, but imagine these APIs talking to your mobile application. So even the authentication and the authorization has to be taken care by the developers. So that is why a lot of issues related to authentication and authorization arises. But the present day scenario, we have APIs which are much more complex, where we have bidirectional flow of data, where data can be sent from the server side to the client side, and it is very hard to intercept those kind of data. So for those kind of APIs, we would require a specific kind of a setup of proxies, specific kind of setup of all of the systems which is there. So since in this webinar, I'll be talking more on request response based APIs. So you do not need a special kind of configuration for those kind of proxies. So, but if I was talking about gRPC based API or WebSocket based API, you might require to set up your proxies in a different way, just so that you can intercept those data and you can figure out, or you can interface with those kind of data and change it and manipulate those data, right? So what are the different gaps on today's API? I'm not going to go into much more theory, but I'll just give you a basic fundamental layer so that you'll understand. Now, web APIs work on either in layer 7, in the application layer of the OSI, if you remember. So that's where API most of the web APIs work on, and there are some kind of a foundational security which is already there. For example, SSL and TLS, it's a default now. If you do not have SSL or TLS configured, most of the browsers are going to reject your calls. Most of the libraries which you might be using to call those APIs will reject your call unless you set it specifically to allow insecure connection. Rate limiting, these are like platform specific security or foundational API security. This does not require a change in the API logic itself, but this requires a change in the platform itself. Even the access control. So if you have access control which relates to some kind of a platform, you can have those kind of security. But there are other kinds of attacks which is possible, like after login, you can do brute force attack, service attacks. You can figure out what are the services which is there and how you can attack those. And the post login attacks would be logical attacks, data exfiltration, figuring out is there a way to get more data or get data which is not available, or figure out any other hidden endpoint. So So there are a lot of gaps in today's API structure. And since API as of now has a standard, but each API standard is kind of different from each other, and each of them has their own default drawbacks or their own default security issues in their implementation, right? So one of the most uh, basic part of API authentication kind of an attack is to figure out what is the credential, replay attacks, probe for application vulnerability, or figure out if any authorization token or JWP tokens which are stolen, and figure out, try to crack those token, and fake yourself into those APIs and send those datas and stuff like that. So without any delay, I'll just jump into the security test cases list for OWASP API. The top 10 security issues which OWASP came up in 2019 around in the November, December are these, right? So most of this might feel like a foreign word for you. So what I'll be doing is I'll go ahead and start showcasing these APIs to you, and start showcasing how we can go ahead and attack those APIs, and classify those into one of these categories. I had a question from Abhijit, which I'm going to answer it live. And Abhijit asked the question like, especially in payment gateway, what measures to take and how to identify it in early stage. The specific measures which you should be taking is following the OWASP API security top 10, and figure out and make sure that this checklist is there before you integrate with any third party, not only payment services, but any other third party API which you might be integrating. You should follow these top 10 issues, these top 10 test cases, and figure out if those APIs, once you interface with those APIs, you are secured, and those APIs are also secured consecutively, right? So now let's go ahead and let's start off with the first case scenario. And before I even start talking about it, let me show you the different kinds of APIs which I have. So I've started few number of services over here, and to set up the lab for this, I'm going to use something called burp. So I already have my burp suite running, and you can use any kind of proxy, not only burp, you can use other kind of proxies also. And since I'm going to talk about not a two directional or a two-way directional communication API, but it's more of a request response type. So you can configure any kind of proxy similar to this. So you can go ahead and work on that, right? So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and open up a browser which has the burp already configured over here, and then I'm going to show you some different kinds of API services, which is right now running in my laptop, right? So there is the first API service which I'll be talking about is GraphQL based API. Now the good part about GraphQL based API is it requires a single endpoint, and then you pass on the query, and depending on that query, you get the responses back. So, but in terms of REST API, you can have different API endpoints to query all your resources. So one of the specific thing in GraphQL based API is you get a endpoint like GraphQL, or so this will be something related to something like this slash graph, not IQL. It will be something like GraphQL with a question mark and a query, and you can write your query over here. So one such example query is something like this. It will so this is an introspection query. So in GraphQL, what does an introspection query means? And if the introspection API is live, so the first thing which you need to do is figure out whether the web app is using a GraphQL backend API. If it is, the first thing which you should be doing is figuring out if there is an introspection available. What does it mean? Introspection API is an API endpoint which will define what are the queries which is available for that GraphQL API endpoint. Right now, this is a little bit difficult for you to understand what it means. So uh, there might be sometimes even a GUI version of the whole thing is also available. Sometimes it is there in the live server. It's called GraphIQL. So this is the introspection query language where you can get a GUI kind of this. But if you actually do not have that, you can basically directly call this API and host this GraphQL in your local host, and configure it to connect to this remote API which is there. So you can also do that and get this GUI kind of this. So this is pretty simple. So the introspection API in this way, it's much more easier to understand. But then again, it is still a little bit hard, right? Because I'm not going to describe what is a query, what is the object, what is this, right? So there exists a lot of GraphQL browser. So one of them I figured out was this GraphQL Visualizer. So this is an open source project. So it says that, hey, why don't you run this introspection query, and whatever the result you get, why don't you paste it over here, and I will showcase, how it all looks like, right? So I'll just refresh this page, and this is a sample introspection result, which they were showcasing it, and you will get something like this. Uh, in my case, I already have the query over here. This is the introspection query, which I just copied from over here. This is the introspection query which I want to copy, and I ran this, right? So if I run this, I get output something similar to this. And once I copy this output and paste it in the introspection result, it kind of gives me these are the available queries which is available in this API, which is there is an auth query, there's an all dogs, dogs, my dog, and my info query, and how it is related or connected to other tables or other columns in the database. That's also shown. The schema is shown over here. So you can see that if you query all dogs, it basically calls the dog schema, which has these properties. And there is a property called veterinary, which will call the veterinary list, and that will give you the ID of the veterinary, the name of the veterinary, and all of this, right? So, and after looking at this, you can basically use GraphQL query to figure out more details. So, for example, um, there is so this is how you write the GraphQL query in a GraphQL. So you can write query any random name which you want to give this, or this is optional. You don't always have to write this query. This is just like a function which you can use, and you can say, okay, all dogs, and it says that all dog requires these are the two parameters which is there. So if I go back to the structure, the all dogs has two parameters. The first is limit, the second is only free, and it will return all the dog table which is there, right? So what I did over here is, I need the ID and the name of all the dogs which is there, and I just ran this query, and I can see all the dogs which are listed over there, right? Now I can but if I look over here in the all dogs query, uh, where did it go? Yeah, over here. I can see dogs not only has an ID but and a name, but it also has a link to veterinary. So if I want to get this name also, what is the veterinary which is there? So I can go ahead and add that parameter also. Or the thing is, you can keep on adding parameters which you want to see the result for. So for example, veterinary is one such parameter. So I can run that veterinary parameter over here, and I can click on run. It will not only give me the ID of the dog, the name of the dog, but who is the veterinary of this dog. By default, the ID will be printed, but let's say if you want to also get few more details of that same veterinary, right? So you can get the name also of the veterinary, the popularity, and all the dogs which that veterinary have, right? And all of this is coming from a single endpoint. That's how the difference is. So let me also get the name of the veterinary which is there, right? So if I run it once again, I'll not only get the ID and the name of the dog, but also the veterinary ID and the name of who, like for example, Dominic is taking care of Abine, who is a dog over there, right? So Dominic is one such unique veterinary which is there, whose ID is one, right? So there might be other veterinary which might be there, like for example, Benoit, whose ID is two. But remember that it's easier to run a query and try to enumerate the objects which is there than to directly call up an object and figure out what are the what are the values on those objects. But this is what GraphQL kind of looks like. Like this is very unique how it looks like. Um, Followed by something called REST API, right? So I already have something running. This is called DVWA. So I'll just go into that directory, DVWS actually, DVWS node. So this is another project which you can actually use for your own use case. You can download this project and you can run it. So this is damn vulnerable web service. So this web service has not only REST API but also a SOAP API. So I'm just going to show you how that looks like. So I've already set it up over here. So let me just go to the, oh, sorry. Let me just go to the endpoint and yeah. So this is the endpoint of DVWS local. Of course, it's showing 404 for now, but if I go over here and if I check, you can see, okay, let me just restart this once again. Mhm. Sorry, this is my GraphQL, which is running. I stopped the wrong one. So let me restart this once again. And as you can see, it has restarted and I can go to DBWS local. And if I go over there, I will get something like a page, something similar to this, right? I'll just switch off the interface once again and try to go over here. Okay, so index.html. That's place to go. Okay. So, but this is where my thing is running, my vulnerable web service is running at this part, right? So what I wanted to showcase is I also have the API docs open for this. For example, this is one of the API doc which is there, and I can see all the APIs which is there. These are kind of a REST APIs because you have put, delete. These are the HTTP get methods and get APIs which is there. So this is more of a REST based API which is there. Let me just run this once. The startup script. Okay, so I think the database is down. So let me just rerun the database once again, and that is why this was not happening. So this is pretty easy to set this up. There is no problem to set it up. Let me just restart the database. Okay, Docker. RM, sorry, Docker PS will show me uh, all the running. Okay, will show me all the running Docker files. So I'm just going to stop these Docker ones and I'll rerun it once again, right? So Docker RM, and I'll just stop this container. Okay, let me just stop it. And also I'll try to stop the other container, the Mongo container. So I'm using different kinds of backend also over here just to show what kind of other injections which you can do. What I'll do is I'll slowly go one by one in the OS top 10, and I'll showcase how all of this can be chained together. All right, I think all of them has stopped. Let's just run the MySQL, and also let me run, let's say, the MongoDB also, right? So I'm running two kinds of database right now. One is a MongoDB backend, the other is the MySQL backend, just to showcase, how these APIs also connect back to the database. So I'm just gonna do a startup script, and it has created that, and all I'm gonna do is npm run dws. This is as easy as like this. And let me try to go over here and check if this is opening. Okay. Let me just see if the API docs is opening. Okay, so but this is how we kind of figure out what are the issues which is happening, and these are some of the API endpoints which is there, right? So coming back over here in the OWASP top 10, the first thing which I'll be talking about is the broken object level authorization. So in terms of broken object level authorization, this deals with things in OWASP top 10 called IDOT. I think you might have heard about IDOT. So IDOT is basically indirect object reference. So for example, if there is an object reference, if there is an object which you cannot refer directly, you can use IDOT to do that. And yeah, so let's just see if I can open up this once again. Yes, this works. This will take some time to start off. So let's try it in my other configured server, but okay, it seems there is a problem. Let me just close this and let me reopen this browser once again, right? Good. Uh, okay, okay, let me showcase you from here. So sometimes it will take some time to open this. Okay, this works. So this is the RAM vulnerable web services, and if I click on inspect, I can basically see what are the network calls which is going. For example, let me try to register. Let me try to log in as admin. I already have, and I think I already have an admin login there. Let me see that logs in. Yeah. So as you can see, I've logged in as admin, and if I click on admin area, you will see that if you're looking at my network tab, and I'll just increase this, there's something called check admin. And if you click on the response, these are all like REST API kind of thing. So for example, if I want to search some user data, let's say test, and if I click on search, you will see that I'm getting a endpoint called DBWS service, and this is kind of a SOAP-based API which I have. So this is how a SOAP-based API kind of looks like. So we have REST-based API, we have a SOAP-based API, we have a GraphQL-based API. Now, all of these three kind of APIs are mostly, uh, to and fro, like you send out a request and get a response back, right? Now, coming to the point where we were talking about how we can use, IDOR. The first part of the OAS top 10, which it talks about, is broken object level authorization. This is basically IDOR. IDOR meaning if there is an object which is there and if you want to reference it, how can you do that, right? So just to give you an example, I'll just quickly log into over here, and let's quickly go back once again. So the session is not saved in this case. The reason the session is not saved is because it is easier for me to go back and forth. I don't have to log out and log in once again. So what I'll do is I'll again log in as admin one, and let's say test 123. And after I log in, I can go to the notes area, and let's say I create a note name ABC with a note type secret, and let's say hello, right? So I create a note, and it says the node has been created successfully. This is the node. And then I can create another node like secret 2, type probably is node, and uh, hello again, right? So this is some kind of nodes which I've created for the admin user. Now what I'll do is I'll just log out from here, and I'll try to go and I'll try to log in as a test user. So again, I already have few test users already prepared and registered. So let's see if I can log in. Okay, if it cannot, yeah, so there you go. The test user is there. So I can go to the notes area, and I can see the test user does not have any notes, right? So what I can do is I can inspect the frame, and I can see in the network tab, uh, if, if, if I enter a node, let's say test node, let's say, and node type is a list probably, and I say, hey, right? And when I create the note, I can see that it actually calls the notes API and figures out over here, as you can see the notes API over here. Um, and if you look at the headers of the request, it says it is requesting this API endpoint slash API slash v2 slash nodes. But if you look at the response, you can see there is something, an internal ID which is coming. So probably if I want to view a node of for mine, so if I want to view this node, probably I can also call, I can just copy this, curl request, copy this as a curl request, and I can run it in my terminal. Let's say I'll run it like this, and this will give me all the nodes of my currently logged in user. So this is what it kinds of come, right? But I can see that there is an internal ID reference coming over here. Can I perform an IDOT to figure out what are the other nodes which is there? So what I can do is I can figure out from the Swagger API, and I can see the nodes have something called an ID. So basically, you can actually send out an ID over here and see what are the nodes which is there. You can do a post request, or you can also do a get request to get it. So let's try to do that itself. So in this case, what I'll do is, let's say I'll go to the nodes API, and instead of getting all my nodes, let's say if I want to try to get the first node which is there, and if I can get that node, which means it's basically a kind of an IDOT, right? So I can see that this node was created by some other user called test point. And similarly, I can go ahead and perform, other kind of IDOT related activities and figure out what are the kind of nodes which is there. So not always you will figure out an API with an ID over here. That is the common misconception. You can also figure out if you can pass on some more IDs in the request parameter itself by figuring out how the response type is. Like I may be able to also call up nodes from other request parameters, but this is how I can figure out, okay, I can perform this. And this is how I can query nodes of other users. This is a basic example of what IDOT is. But what I mean by the first point of what OAS API Security Top 10 talks about is the broken object level authorization. This is an example of that. This is followed by a very important thing, which is called broken user authentication. Now, most of the APIs which I've talked about, they use a kind of an authentication called token-based authentication. It is used as a token-based authentication because, as I say, API generally talks between a system to another system, or from one program to another program, like from a backend program to a front-end program. So since the API queries it in that way, so there is nothing called cookies or browser handling the session. Those does not come into the picture, and that is why we have come up with something called token-based authentication, where we actually pass in a token, and the token is where all the session-related information is stored. Now, one of the famous token which most of the API uses is called JWT token, or you can also say JSON Web Token, right? JWT kind of a token. And this is one of the most useful website which is there. You should go to gwt.io if you are working with any kind of JWT based authentication or authorization. How does JWT work? JWT works in a very similar fashion. So if you look at the API over here, if you look at the API, it has something called authorization, bearer, and the token. So this token is a JWT token. And how do I understand that this is a JWT token? Most of, like, almost all JWT tokens, I mean, actually JWT token, that's the standard, has two periods. So as you can see, this is divided into three parts. So this is the first part, which has a dot, and then the second part, which again ends when there is a dot. As you can see over here, there is a dot. I'll just increase the size of this so that you can see much more better. And the third part is this, right? So any JWT token will have these three sections. Okay. Now I'll just tell you what are these three sections. The first section is the header section. The header section is basically, if you go to the JWT token, jwt.io, you can see the header space of the token has algorithm, what kind of algorithm this token is has been generated with, what is the type of the token, is it JWT or is it some other XML based JWT token and things like that. So you can do that. That's in the header part. The second part of the token is the payload. So this might contain your session information, like what is the user, what is any other thing like scope, public scope, read scope, or things like that. So this is the payload version of the token. So this, as you can see, this is the payload version of the token, which contains the data. And the last part of the token is the most important part of the JWT token, which is the signature part of this token. So this validates whether this token is a proper token or not. So if I tamper with the token, the server will obviously go ahead and check with the signature whether the signature has been tampered with, and if the signature has been tampered with, then the token will be rejected. So there exists a lot of token libraries which is there, right? So if you go to the libraries section of jwt.io, you can actually see what these libraries are there and if they support few of the things, right? So I'll just go a little bit more deep into the payload section of the token. You can have your custom payload, but one of the most major important part of the payload which needs to be there is the IAT. IAT is issued at time. So this is basically the Unix timestamp of when this was issued. And then there is EAT also, which is expired time. So this token is obviously not a secure token because it doesn't have an expiry time, and it is a little bit like so. If you can paste the token over here at jwt.io, you can figure out in the payload if it has expiry or not and things like that. You can certainly do that. But there might be some logical way of figuring some application does not have expiry time, but they do have token rotation in place in the backend. And if that happens, then what happens is there is a refresh token which is being generated, and it creates another JWT token. But if you figure out that there is no expiry time in a token, you should report it as a security issue in your assessments. That's one of the most important thing in a JWT token. Followed by the last part is the signature. For the signature to verify or to get it matched, you need to know what is the secret of the JWT token, right? So in this case, what I'll try to do is try to crack this token. And before I try to crack this token, I'll just come over here. Broken user authentication is mostly like that. Broken user authentication is basically you have to figure out if there is a way where you can generate some user or log in as some other user, and this falls under this category of broken user authentication, right? So just to give you a quick example how that works, it's pretty simple. So I already have the token over here, and I have a cracker. So there exists a lot of crackers in over here. So let me just show you one of the most few of the most famous crackers which is there. So there is one cracker called CJWT cracker. So I'll just showcase you how that kind of looks like. Uh, you can actually download this from your GitHub project, which is this CJWT cracker. This is a GitHub project. Again, all of this link will be shared with you at the end. And you can use this to crack your JWT token if the token is not that complicated. And the other very important part of the token which you can crack if it is a GWT token is the kind of the algorithm, right? So what I'll do before I go ahead and work on it is I'll just copy this JWT token, I'll paste it in jwt.io just to see what kind of token this is. This is an algorithm of HS256. The problem is HS256 is the weakest algorithm in JWT, and most of the library, if you do not configure it properly, by default uses HS256, which is the most vulnerable kind of an algorithm. So if you actually ever come across HS256 kind of an algorithm, please tag it as a security issue, right? And the payload data has what kind of user, what kind of permissions, and everything. And and as you can see, it says invalid signature because I do not have what is the secret key. And I'll try to figure out the secret key. For your information, the secret key is actually over here. This is the JWT secret key, which is test, which is very insecure and it is very easy to crack. So what I'll do is I'll come over here, and this is one of the cracker which I'm using, which I've compiled. It's a JWT crack, and this works on top of CPU cycle. And I'll just paste on the token which I just copied, and I'll just paste this token back over here, and I'll try to crack this. Since this is test, this is very easy to crack, and the secret is test. I can figure that out, and I can actually copy this secret in JWT over here, right? And I can, and as you can see, it says signature is verified, which means right now I can change this user parameter to, let's say, admin1, and I can use this same token to log in as admin1, because now I have the actual secret of the JWT. So this is how JWT tokens are vulnerable towards hacking of APIs basically. And this is very important that you should not be using this kind of an algorithm. There are many other kinds of algorithm as listed over here. The minimum which you should be using is HS384. If you are still hell bent in using HS256, or if your library does not support any other algorithm apart from HS256, you should have a much better secret rather than test or 4 letter secret. It should be at least a 5 letter secret which is there, but then those are also easily crackable in under a day. So and what about this? What are the issues in this? You can actually go and read about some of the critical vulnerabilities which is related to this token hacking and how to crack it. So it has a lot many articles on how what are the different problems which is there, and I would certainly encourage you guys to go ahead and read about this over here, right? So let's go back to the slide once again. We are in the second one. The third one is the excessive data exposure. The problem with excessive data exposure is nowadays all the frameworks which are there, uh, nowadays there are a lot of frameworks which is there where you query the database, and you basically send the response of the query database back to the user, which might contain all many personally identifiable information. To give you an example, if you look at this API, and what I'll do is I'll again try to log out, and I'll try to log in once again, and let's see if I can log in with my username and password. And instead of logging in, what I'll do is I'll try to register a user, right? So let's register a user, for example, user, and the password is also user, right? So I'm just going to clean everything over here. And if I click on register, it says, user has been registered, but it also sends the password. This is the hash password. So you cannot do anything basically. But the problem is you shouldn't be sending out everything which exists in the user table back as a response, right? So while you're creating a user or while creating some sensitive operation, make sure you check what kind of data are being returned back. It may not only have your password, it might also have your email address, it might also have any other personally identifiable information like your date of birth and things like that. And let's say if I try to log in also, in the login, I hope they do not send. So login is basically a post, and once you send it, the form data is user, it basically comes back and it basically logs you in as a user, right? So at the end, this is what it means by excessive data exposure. So these are some specific test cases and checklists which you should be going through. These are like basic sanity checks, right? Followed by something very interesting. It's called lack of resource and rate limiting. Now we already know about rate limiting because we know that if there is an API and if you can brute force OTPs and things like that, you can put in a rate limiting. But what about resource limiting? This is a very unique case for a GraphQL based kind of a server, right? In case of GraphQL based kind of a server, you can actually query recursively, and that can blow up the overall resources. As I was showing you in the GraphQL kind of a query, I can go ahead and query an internal DB, and it can the link DB. The problem is there is a cyclic query over here. So I can go from here to veterinary and I can go to the dogs, and from the dogs I can again call the veterinary, and then I can again call the dogs, and this can go as a cyclic query, right? As you can see, this like I have done a lot of API based assessment. For me, just looking at this, I can figure out that, oh, I can basically do a kind of a resource, resource heavy query in this server. I can make it an unlimited resource heavy query. And one such query which I have written for this is very simple example. This will basically make it a denial of service. So what it does, as I was saying, it will get the dogs and it will take the veterinary. The veterinary will again call the dogs, which will again call the veterinary, it will again call the dogs for all the dogs which is there. So it becomes a very resource heavy, and I put in a limit because if I don't put a limit, my laptop is going to get hung. Just to give you an example, this is how it will always look like. It will never complete the query itself. but the query itself is running in the background. And this is a kind of how resource limiting has to work. So resource limiting is a kind of a logical issue or a logical problem. And a good way to figure it out is figuring out how it is going, what is the logic of the overall program. This is a very good example of that. And I cannot show this for REST-based API, but for REST-based API, there are things like pagination, right, where you can get a lot of pages, and you can figure out if you can query unlimited number of pages or a negative index of a page, and that might require a lot of resource. As you can see, I have not done much. It's not like I've written it like millions of times. It's just this much makes it, hang, right? So just for the sake of it, I'll just refresh it, and the query has stopped as of now. Uh, I'll just go back a little bit and I'll talk about the user authentication part also. In GraphQL, authentication is a little bit pain. The reason is, authentication does not happen like a GWT thing. Although a GraphQL based API can give you a GWT token, in this case, I have done that. So for example, if I click on get vet and I can see what are the veterinary names which is there, and these are the veterinary names. So for example, if I want to log in as ADCLA. So this is a vulnerable graph query thing, right? So I can see there is something called an auth over here. If you look over here, there is this auth query, which basically just passing the veterinary name and it will return with a query string. Let's see what it does, right? So if I go back to graph query and I put in the veterinary name as Julian, or in this case, let's say AD Silla, and then if I run this, it will basically give me an JWT token once again saying, oh, this is the token which you can use to do. And then followed by this. So this is also one of the very important, found in numerous GraphQL servers which is out there, where you can actually authenticate an user. Generally, there is a password field also, but there is no such checks. You can use SQL injection also to get to bypass those kind of queries and get the auth token, and then perform broken access control. Like for example, I can get the info of someone else altogether with some other veterinary ID, right? So I can do that also. So for example, if I copy this auth token which just got generated, and if I use this auth token over here, and if I run it, I'll get what is the info and what are the dogs this guy manages. So these are the few things in GraphQL which you need to keep in mind, right? So coming back over here, I'll be talking now more about broken function level authorization. So this is not like IDOR. IDOR is like broken object level authorization, right? Function level authorization is things like if there is an admin panel, can you access those admin panel and things like that, right? So I'll go back to what it kind of feels like when you register an user, right? So I'll just open an inspect element over here. Uh, I'm sorry, my burp is not working, but I can do it over terminal because I generally don't use any other proxies. But yeah, if you're feeling that terminal is too much, you can actually perform all of this in any kind of proxy. Just for this demo, I'm showing it in terminal. So yeah, so what I'll do is let me again register another user like user1 with password user1. And if I click on register, you will see that this is the register kind of request kind of looks like. I'm not sure whether you can see it. But in the response, you can see the status is this, the user is this, and this is the password, as I was saying. And if I try to log in, it basically gives you, a login, with, what are the headers and things like that. And somehow I figured out that while registering, I can also pass in some additional parameters such as admin. So what I'll be doing is I'll just copy the user registration module. In this case, I'll just copy this as a curl request, and I'll try to play it over here. I think this terminal is big enough for you to understand. So as you can see, this is the kind of the curl request. And if I try to create the user once again with the same data, it will say that the user already exists. So it won't create the same user, right? But if I create a different user, like let's say user2 with a password user2, it will create that user. Now I figured out from the database, from the response, that there is something called admin, whether admin is true or not, or the admin is true or false, right? So the API which I figured out is whenever I log in, right, I can click on this admin area, and when I click on admin area, it actually calls up one endpoint which is like check admin, right? So if I click on check admin, where did the check admin go? So I can also search over here check admin, right? So if I click on check admin, it basically says, if I look at the response, headers, it will say it tried to go over here, but it did not allow. It's a 400, not, 401. So you're not allowed to enter the admin area, right? So what I'll try to do is I'll try to create an admin user. So what I'll do is in this case, let's say I put in the username as, let's say, admin2, and the password is admin2, and then I try thinking that whatever the data which I give is actually directly saved into the password field. So I'll say admin is equals to true, right? And then if I press enter, it actually creates a user with admin credential true, right? So as you can see, user is admin2, status is 201, it got created, and the password is also reflected back. Now let me try to log in as admin2, and let's see if I can go to the admin area and figure out what are the issues which is there, right? So let's just do that. No, sorry. Let me just log out from this user and let me log in as admin2. Admin2, admin2. And if I log in, it will show me, if I click on admin area, I can actually see the admin area which is happening over here, right? So these are some, I can get into admin access, or I can change my role to some other role. If there is role equals to false or true as a response in the API, try to pass those as a parameter also, and figure it out, right? And the last thing is the mass assignment. So mass assignment is similar to, as I was talking about, this is somewhat similar to broken function level authorization. So in terms of broken function level authorization, I can basically escalate the privilege which I have into some other privileges. But in terms of mass assignment, as you can see, if you look at the response, and if you can figure out, these are the response which is coming, can I send this also as a parameter in the API, and I can assign it also over there. So these are the mass assignment kind of a vulnerability. One such vulnerability is, creating another user with another parameter. So that's one, right? Uh, I'm not going to talk more about security misconfiguration because we covered this in the last webinar. Misconfigurations are related to SSL, CORS, CORS related issue, like cross origin domain related issues and things like that. So I'm not going to talk much about that, but I'm pretty sure if you have been doing web application security testing, these are some of the things which you have been doing in the past on your web application. Uh, yeah. So, but I'm going to only focus on API related issues or issues which are relevant to the API. So I'm going to move forward to something called injection. So this is pretty interesting because now in terms of API, there are multiple kinds of injection, which is also similar to web. So there are SQL injection, there are injection related to XXE, there are no SQL kind of an injection. Just to give you an example how all of these kind of looks like, uh, a SQL injection of a GraphQL query kind of looks something similar to like this, right? So if I want to get the name of a dog, I can write, and GraphQL query might be a front-end query language, and the backend might be a Postgres server or a MySQL server. In this case, it is a MySQL server. So this is one of the query which I have written, which will give me all the dogs name over here, right? So if I click on this query, it will actually give me, dog's name with ABI, ABIME, and other queries, which is not at all associated with me. So I can get all of these query. I can send a SQL injection query over here and then get the whole database, the backend database of the graph query language, which is there, right? But then GraphQL may not be attached to a SQL-based database server. It might be attached to a MongoDB kind of a server, or a NoSQL kind of a server, or it can be attached to a graph kind of a server, right? So for all of those, you can also perform all of these kind of a query also inside the GraphQL query itself, right? I'm going to also talk about an injection called XXC injection, which is prevalent in a SOAP-based UI. So I already showcased to you how a SOAP-based UI kind of looks like. That is available in this case. It is available. Uh, uh, where is my thing? Yeah, in this case, this is available in the admin area. So if I actually look at the inspect element, and if I look at how this kind of works, if I go to the network section, and let's say if I search for a user called test, and if I click on search, this is the user service, and this is a SOAP-based API, because if you look at the response, it's an XML response. But not always all SOAP-based APIs are something like this. You can get the service definition of SOAP-based API by something like this. So you can copy this overall URL, right? And you can call these, you can copy this overall URL. So I'll just copy this as a link address, and I'll open this over here. And a SOAP-based URL is a URL which defines all the service. So you can actually type in WSDL to get the list of all the service. If this WSDL file is open, then this is definitely a security issue. You can report it as one of the informative under an information security under an informative category, that okay, all your definitions are open and people can figure out what are the different things which is there, right? Now XXE injection is a very amazing kind of injection, and these injection happens because of how XML parsers work. This is also one of our interview questions when we are hiring security professionals. So XXE injection depends on only one thing, and which is the most important thing, which is the DTD. DTD is basically the definition of the doc type. So so if you look at this, the definition of the doc type is actually okay. What I'll do is I'll open up from here and I'll try to show it to you. Yes. So the DTD, so over here, the doc type is not defined over here, but you can actually have your own doc type. This is one of the doc type which is also defined over here. So you can actually use your own doc type, and you can query one of the internal files, or you can query internal using XXC. You can figure out what are the open ports and things like that. So one of the best way of doing this, I'll show it to you. I'll just copy this as a curl once again. Uh, and I'll just paste it once again over here just for you to understand how it kind of looks like. And if I press enter, it kind of tells you, uh, there you go. This is how it kind of looks like, right? So to create my own, DTD, to embed my own DTD, what I'll do is I'll just copy this for the sake of, I'll just copy this whole curl command so that I can easily edit it in a text editor. So I'll just open it. Let's open a new text editor. And how I am gonna do it is I'll first define that this is an XML payload. So I'll just copy this XML version string over here, right? And I'll just paste it over here. And in case you are using curl, if you have to go to the next line, you can use \n. That should work. So let me also do that, \n. That will take you to the next line. And then I will be defining my own document type definition. There are many document type definitions available. You can go through it. One of the document type definitions which I want to do is I want to call a system file, and I want to bind it to a document, let's say exploit. So let's just do that. So I'll just copy this document type definition from here, and I'll just paste it in my code, in my Visual Code, right? I'll just increase the size. I'm not sure if you guys can see it. Yeah. So this is the document type which I've just included, and I'm saying that bind it to this whatever, bind it to this entity, exploit entity, and I want to view the value of this exploit entity where. So if you look over here, uh, in the body, there is something called username, and there is a string. So in test, I can, after that, or I can just remove the test and I can put exploit and a semicolon. So what it will do is it will print the document type right over here. This is one way of doing an XXE. I'll just copy this and I'll just paste it over here. I'll paste it. Okay. I think I didn't copy. Okay, let's copy this once again, and I'll just paste it over here, and I'll press enter, and let's see if I can get an XXE out of this. Uh, okay, it says user not found as a string. Uh, okay, this is very difficult to do via a curl command, but if you are actually using a proxy, it's pretty easy to do it. I actually have the you can actually go to their DVWS node, and you can go to the wiki. They have one of the payload which you can actually use. Since it's taking a little bit of time for me to do it, what I'll just do it is I'll just copy this payload directly, and I'll figure out. I'll let you know how it kind of looks like, right? So this is the payload which I have. Sorry, yeah. So this is the payload which I have. The same thing, right? Entity exploit system. This is the doc type which I've defined, and over here the doc type comes. Oh, okay. I figured out. I did not put ampersand because this is a reference. That was my mistake. Okay, it's pretty simple. Okay. Let's say correct. So it needs to be an ampersand because this points to that entity. Let's just copy this once again. Let's try this once again, and let's see if I can get the shadow file. Let's see. Yes, I got it. Right. So I got the shadow files which is there over here. So this is how we can figure out what are the XXC kind of a vulnerability and figure out in terms of SOAP-based APIs. Also, in terms of SOAP-based API, you can also paste in your SQL injection string inside the string and perform the SOAP-based API kind of SQL injection. I'll go back to my presentation, and I'll try to be doing it a little bit faster. The next is the improper asset management. This is not something which I'm going to show it in a demo, but this is something which we showed it in the last webinar also. So we use things like derb. Okay, we use things like derb or brute force other API endpoints and things like that. So I figured out that there is a Swagger API doc in dbs.local, and you can also figure out all of these API docs. So if there is an API, if you are doing an assessment on top of an API, most probably the API docs are going to be open, so you can go through and check it. If those APIs have XML RPC APIs, you can also go and check. Most of the API from the frameworks which is there has a live testing endpoint which kind of tells whether the API is up or not, so you can discover all of those, followed by insufficient logging and monitoring. So this is something which I cannot show you, but this is again something which we have shown in the last API webinar, where we showed how you can do log attacks in logs, and perform even server side attacks using that. So these are the top 10 API related issues which is there, right? And yeah, so I think that's all my demo. I tried to cover as much as I can in terms of GraphQL as an API and how we can perform different kinds of introspection and things like that. I've also covered how we can use REST APIs kind of way to figure out what are the issues, what are the most common issues which you need to figure it out. And I've also tried to cover the SOAP based APIs also, and how you can figure out all the issues which is there in terms of SOAP based API. And for all of these, you do not require a tool. Mostly what you do require is a little bit of understanding how APIs work and a proxy by which you can intercept and do. The beauty of GraphQL based API, you do not require a proxy. You can, if the introspection is on, you can directly use a GraphQL to perform all kind of API related scans on top of that. So yeah, so that's what my demo is. I'm looking forward for questions. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of questions which is there. Um so Arun has asked, may I know the name of the application which you're running in your machine for GraphQL? So GraphQL, there I'll be sharing the link. It's again an open source Java-based application which I'm running. I don't remember the name right now, but I'll share it. You guys can perform all of these kind of attacks on top of that API. So this is done. Uh, Someone also asked the question, what is the severity of rate limit header? Severity, it depends. It depends if you can perform a denial of service on top of the API, the severity becomes high. Please use the severity in terms of CVSS scoring. That's what we follow. So CVSS version 3 scoring, you can go over here and you can fill up, you can use this calculator to fill it up. What kind of, if the rate limiting is not there, and how it affects the the attack vector. Is it a network? What is the complexity? Does it require a privilege to perform the rate limiting, to perform the denial of service attack? Does it require user interaction and things? And it will give you a proper severity according to CVSS version 3 kind of a score, right? So this is done. I think this is a similar question followed by what type of questions we can ask during scope or walkthrough call with clients. This is a very good question. So one of the basic things which you should be asking for an API security assessment basically, I'll just come to this slide because these are a few things which we ask. Is the API documentation, if they have an API documentation or not, if they have a Postman collection, because they might have all the APIs inside a Postman collection or a Swagger documentation. That's the basic thing which you should be asking. If you're doing a GraphQL based assessment, please tell them to, and if it is a gray box kind of an assessment, please tell them to make the introspection API live, because it will make your life easier to figure out what are all the queries and perform the assessment. But if it's a black box assessment, first you need to figure out whether the introspection API is there or not, and then using brute force techniques, figure out all the functions or all the queries which is there, right? How to test microservices API? This is a very good question, but this is something which is not in the scope of this presentation. This will be in the scope on the next presentation, because most of the microservices which is out there uses MQTT or or WebSockets based connections. They also do use REST based connection, uh, but uh, but mostly these are like RPC kind of a call which happens between microservices. So this is something which I'm going to cover in the next webinar, which is not going to be an hour long, but it will be a little bit more, because it requires a more technical understanding on how different services interact and how we can perform assessment on top of that. So yeah, no rate limiting while creating a case in API. Is this a vulnerability? While creating a case, I don't understand what you mean by creating a case, but if it is a rate limiting, if there is no rate limiting, and if you can do a brute force to figure out things, then it's a vulnerability. But if there are no APIs, like if there is no brute forceable API, then it's not a vulnerability. It's just a low. It's a very informative kind of a vulnerability. Again, the severity you can calculate it from the CVSS scoring website, the calculator which I showed you. This will give you a better severity on what are the issues which is there, right? So where does basic auth comes under OWASP API? So basic auth is JSON Web Token uses a bearer kind of a auth. Basic auth has a similar way of doing it. Basic auth is something which is a legacy kind of an auth, which is no more used, because if you use a basic auth, you have the username and the password right there in base 64 encoded way. So basic auth is something which is a legacy system. It is very insecure. Please do not use basic auth. Instead, if you can use JSON Web Tokens or any kind of a token-based authentication, I would certainly tell you to use that. OAS did not consider basic auth at all. I mean, they did consider. If you actually go to their documentation, I'll just open up OAS API top 10 GitHub. They have their documentation in GitHub, and you can actually go there and you can see if you use a basic auth, a lot of things are already broken in terms of OAS top 10, right? Okay, so this is done. Is using basic authentication a vulnerability in REST API? Because then an endpoint is opened in the browser, the prompted login field doesn't have rate limiting because of basic auth design. Again, basic auth is, as I'm saying, basic auth is basically something like an internal bridge. Again, where basic auth comes into the picture and where API comes into the picture. API is related to machine, or from one application to another application, like from a backend application to the front end application kind of a configuration. If you're using basic auth, things like credentials sniffing, things like if there is a security misconfiguration in a server, if someone does an MITM attack, they can figure out the basic auth part of it. Sometimes the browser stores the basic auth token internally as a cache because it may not ask you in a prompt to put in the login and the password each and every time. So there are certain number of overall attack scenarios which is there, but of course it's not like an exploitable attack. But basic auth is something which is not considered secure because you are basically transmitting things in a plain text format, and the integrity can be compromised in a basic auth kind of a way. So, any known common issue mistakes with OAuth token? This is an amazing question. I have not shown you anything related to OAuth, or if you were looking at this document of JWT document, which I told you to go through, it has the implementation, how they have done it for OAuth 2 and OpenID connector, and how OAuth 2 uses JWT token, and how they have figured out how to use the security and what are the common mistakes which is there. Please go through this document. This is an amazing document. You should be going through this, right? Is there any automated tool to test SOAP API? There are many open source tools to do it. I've never used any tool. I am always a hands-on guy. I use terminal a lot. So I do not have an idea about that. But there are tools like Nessus. There are tools like Appknox, I guess. They have I mean, most of the web application scanner will have SOAP based attacks because SOAP is a legacy system. It's there been for ages. It's been like 20-25 years ago. SOAP system came into the picture, and that's one of the major reason why web app security came up alive. So there are a lot of tools which you can use it. But you need to understand the fundamentals of what SOAP API is to figure it out. That's what I tried to show it over here. Srijit asked me any common known. Okay, this I've already answered. Uh, how can we conduct a black box test on API without documentation? As I said, as I was showing you a few of the things where I'm referring to the response of the API and figuring out whether I can put that key in the request itself. One such is the admin equals to true. The other was if you remember, if I was looking at the response properly and I can see there is some internal ID which is coming, and this is how I figured out, oh, why can't I send that ID as a parameter over here? A few things comes from experience. I know that this is a REST-based API, so this is how it will work. But if it is something else, if it is a query, if it is a post-based query, then you should have put it in the post request itself. But yeah, you can go ahead and do that. You can go ahead and add few other things like body, user, created date. Probably I can also change the created date part of it also, which I've not checked. But so these are some kind of brute force things which you can also perform. But the checklist of OAS top 10 for API is what you should be focused on to figure out all these different issues which is there, right? So this is done. Can we bypass session token in API? A defined session token. Session token is any token which makes the session alive. One okay, one such example I can show it to you right away is if you look at this thing, right? I can do user not found, right? But this uses my authentication. This is the session token for this API, right? This uses JWT token. But apparently I figured out uh, this is not validated at all, right? So if I actually copy this whole thing, if I just copy this whole thing and I paste it in my code once again, let's say I create a new document, I paste it. And what I do is I just remove this authentication token itself. Right now I'm no more logged in as a user, as an admin user, right? But due to this issue I can actually also uh, you know enumerate through all the users and figure out what are the other users which is there. So if I can click on enter, it tells me user not found, exploit, right? So I can have a username which is there, which we know it's gonna be there. So let's put that username over here. Um, let's say the username is test, right? Because or user one, right? So that's one of the user I just created for you. but this does not is not validated the token. So this kind of shows you session token is not getting validated, right? Okay, thank you so much for all the answers. I think we have gone overboard with the time, so I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm going to hand it over back to Harshit. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope the session was useful. I'm also waiting for Harshit to take this to the end. Thank you so much. We also have a small survey. So
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Shubho. I hope this was beneficial for all of you guys. In case you guys have any feedback, feel free to share with us. We have few open questions, but we will send back replies of that over email. We have a lot of answered questions as well. We'll send all of that over email with the video recordings. And thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to more feedback over email from all of you. And we'll end this poll in a minute, and after that we'll wrap up the session. Meanwhile, if anybody has any question that you want to ask, or any suggestion, please feel free to type us, or mention us on the chat, and we'll take it up from there. Thank you. Thanks a lot, everybody, and have a, good day. Take care. Thanks.
thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah, we'll be just ending the poll in another 10 seconds, and then I think we are good to leave. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Take care.